right. All right. Welcome, everyone. Was so excited for you to be here today. This is on behalf of DBSA California. So we welcome people from all over, but we are based in California. My name is Caroline. I am on the board of directors as well as the education committee. And I have the great honor of introducing our speaker for tonight, Gabe Howard. Gabe is an award-winning speaker, author, and podcast host who is passionately dedicated to mental health advocacy while living with bipolar disorder. With over 250 keynote addresses under his belt, he has had the honor of sharing his message at esteemed venues like Oxford University and the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Gabe's work has been featured on major media outlets such as ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, with over 150 appearances in news media coverage. He's also known for his wonderfully informative podcast, Inside Bipolar, and is the author of the book Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Big round of applause for all of you for being here. Thank you, thank you. So, the way that I have this envisioned, and please, this is very informative, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll just tell a little bit of my story, then we'll open it up for Q&A, and we'll see what happens. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah, I've turned off the chat for right now, but once we get to Q&A, I'll open it up. That way I can more easily see what everybody's asking and we can keep it nice and clear for Gabe.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. So here's the little 50-cent tour of Gabe. So all the way back in 2004, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder after being committed to a psychiatric hospital. And I can honestly tell you the moment that I woke up in a psychiatric hospital was the first moment that I realized that anything was wrong with me mental health wise. And this is despite thinking about suicide every day for my entire life. Now, when I always say that, and people hear that, they're like, okay, so you were 20, I was 26 years old back in 2004, and they're like, you were 26 years old, you thought about suicide every day of your life. And I always say, yes, I did. And the first question that people ask is that didn't tip you off that something was wrong? And I say, well, no, I always felt this way. So I just thought it was normal. When I looked at my parents, my teachers, my peers, my friends, etc., I thought that they were all thinking about suicide every moment of every day as well. See, that's the problem with being born with something. It's normal to you. And as I'm really fond of saying, if you think that mental health education is lacking in 2025, you should have seen it in the 80s. It was terrible then. Frankly, it's not much better now, but it was even worse then. The next thing that I point out is I was raised stereotypically blue collar. Now that's not an insult to blue collar people. I don't want anybody to hear that. It's just that we weren't surrounded by a lot of doctors, social workers, mental health professionals. I was surrounded by men who believed that men had two jobs. One, get a job. Two, never, ever, ever express any sort of emotion whatsoever. My father, who is a very good man, I swear, despite the fact that he's about to come off like an idiot, my father honestly believed that any problem that befell a man could be resolved by rubbing mud on it. He said things like, don't cry, you throw like a girl, don't act like a sissy. I mean, these were all the messages that I was absorbing. So when I cried myself to sleep at night, this was very shameful and I didn't tell anybody. So obviously, if I'm not telling people that I have depression, that I have emotions, that I'm crying, I'm certainly not telling people that I want to kill myself. And because I did this since birth, it just seemed very normal to me. And I thought that it was just part of the human condition. And the second thing that people always say to me is they're like, well, now wait a minute. When you were, 12 years old, you thought about suicide? And I say yes. And this makes them uncomfortable. So they try to, trick me, I guess. And they're like, so wait, when you were 6 years old, you thought about suicide? And I'm like, I don't know where I'm losing you. I'm speaking in clear, plain words. Yes. I thought about suicide as far back as I can remember every single day. And then they really dig their heels in and like, aha, every single day. So when you are happy, you thought about suicide? And I would say, yeah, I would think today is the day I'm not going to kill myself. It was intrinsic into my personality to weigh the pros and cons of life and death, to have this huge range of emotions. I describe bipolar disorder as God or garbage, right? When I'm manic, I thought I was a god. I thought the whole world revolved around me. And when I have depression, I think that I'm garbage, that if I died, nobody would miss me. And I just vacillated back and forth between those two things, except when I would end up in the middle. And I know I'm speaking to a crowd that understands bipolar disorder, so I hate to tell you what you already know, but I'm sort of stuck on autopilot. I I feel like bipolar disorder is sort of an intermittent illness, right? Everybody talks about it as highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows, and it creates this idea, I think, in the public's head that you're either high or you're low. But it's actually a spectrum of which there is a high and there is a low, but there's also everything in between. And the reason that I bring this up is because one of the things that's in between is the middle, the average, the stereotypical. Or as I like to say, that's when you achieve. That's when you get the job. That's when you buy the house. That's when you meet the person of your dreams. That's when you build all the relationships, all the things that you lose when you become symptomatic. But more importantly, when you're in those middle stages, people see you be good. They see you achieve, they see you excel, they see you do things. So when you become symptomatic, they see that as aberrant. And they know that you can do better because they've seen it. And I feel that this really saps the sympathy away from people. They don't see our mania or our depression as symptoms. They see them as, frankly, us acting out or us being problematic or us needing to get our shit together. That's something that I hear all the time when people are dealing with people with bipolar disorder. And frankly, I hear it in our own community too. I talk to so many people living with bipolar disorder, and they're just like, I've got a good job and I've got a good spouse and I love my friends and I've got a good life. I just need to get my shit together, as if you can just will this away, that if you just try harder, it'll be fine. And I think a lot that if we, people living with bipolar disorder, believe it, we can't really get too mad at society for believing the same thing. But one of the dangers of people believing that it's an intermittent illness, and this is where it connects to my story, is my family didn't think anything that was wrong. My family didn't think anything was wrong with me that couldn't be ascribed to the teenage years, right? Mania, I stayed up all night. Yeah, teenagers stay up all night all the time. Depression, I refused to get out of bed. Teenagers refuse to get out of bed all the time. Lack of motivation, I didn't want to go to school. Well, yeah, we've never heard of teenagers refusing to go to school, right? Grandiosity, I think I thought I knew everything. Yeah, teenagers have never once thought they knew everything. I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be a football star. I'm going to achieve this, that, and the other thing. All hallmarks of grandiosity and mania, and also hallmarks of, well, being a teenager. So even though I had all of the warning signs of bipolar disorder and could have easily gotten help at a much younger age, my parents didn't know what they were looking at. The people around them didn't know what they were looking at. So they just thought that I was a bad kid. And because they thought that I just needed some direction, I just needed some guidance, I just needed some boundaries, I just needed a firm hand, right? They tried to punish bipolar disorder out of me. Now, I want to let everybody know it didn't work. You can't punish the symptoms of bipolar disorder out of somebody. But what it did do is convince me that, well, I was a bad person. And I didn't want to be a bad person. I really hate telling the story in this way because it makes it seem like my parents were unreasonable. But realistically, my parents were stuck in the same trap that I was in, which is they had zero knowledge of a frankly superior enemy. Bipolar disorder was just lapping us. I mean, it was just kicking our ass and owning us, and everything that my parents did to try to run interference, bipolar disorder was able to handle really, really easily. And I believed that I believed very, very strongly that if I just tried harder, I could do better. If I just worked harder, I could do better. And back to that intermittent part of bipolar disorder, sometimes it would work. It actually didn't work. It just sort of, my effort coincided with the natural mood swing of bipolar disorder, but I pushed the two together as if it were working. Kind of like if you jump up in the air at the same time your favorite rock band hits that note and you land right when the note hits, right? You feel like you did it. It feels really good. Like everybody jumps up in the air and boom, the guitars and the bass goes off and you're like, yeah. But realistically, you know that that sound was going to happen whether you jumped or not. You've just sort of tricked yourself into believing that you were part of it. And that's okay. That makes concerts fun, right? We're in on it. But when you're not in on it, when you honestly believe that you jumping up in the air is what made that sound, then it becomes dangerous because you can't rely on it. And as I reached adulthood, it became dangerous. And here's why. All the other times I jumped up in the air, my mom saw me and she would rush and she would go get a bass drum and she would pound it just as I landed because my mom's a good mom and because she was running interference and because she didn't want me to crash. She didn't want me to get hurt. As I got in trouble in school, my parents would go in and smooth it over. Whenever I had a problem, my parents would fix it. And realistically, how much damage can a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old do to themselves, especially when their parents are heavily engaged? But then I graduated high school and my parents were exhausted. I'm the oldest child. They had two other kids. They got me through high school. They got me to adulthood. They were just like, hey, live long and prosper, my son. We've done all we can for you. And they stopped running that interference. Well, when you tell off a teacher, you get detention. When you yell at a boss, you get fired. And when you get fired, you don't have health insurance or money. When you don't have health insurance or money, you don't have stability. You don't have food. You don't have your basic needs met. All of the sudden, all of the little things that my parents were able to easily fix started to mount. They became catastrophic. And I got married young. I got married right out of high school. I was 19 years old when I got married. So a lot of the things that I did also impacted my wife. And obviously, she was an innocent bystander in all of this. She didn't know that she married somebody who was sick. She didn't understand mental illness either. We lasted 5 years before we got divorced because, as it turns out, women do not like to be married to untreated bipolars. Who knew? Nobody was more shocked than me. And here I was, 26 years old. I had weighed the pros and cons of life or death my entire life. I was a bitter disappointment at work. I was a bitter disappointment to my now divorcing me wife. My grandmother is very Catholic, and here I am getting divorced. So I wasn't looking forward to that conversation. And I really just decided, I tried. I really tried. I gave it my all. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to make it, but I'm clearly not cut out for this. So after a lifetime of weighing the pros and cons of life or death, I finally decided that death was my choice. And I had convinced myself that my mother and my grandmother, arguably the two people on the planet who love me the most, would be at my funeral and they would be happy. I actually envisioned them having this conversation next to my dead body where they're like, he made a lot of mistakes, but he finally got this one right. I know, I'm so proud of him. Yeah, he did the right thing here. This is what's going through my brain. This is what I think is normal. That my grandmother and my mother would be happy that their son and grandson had passed away. Looking back at it from this vantage point, how could I not realize that something was wrong? But I didn't, because this is how my brain always worked. And bipolar disorder had convinced me that this was a rational thought. And I had no ability to distinguish between irrational and rational thoughts because everything that was going on in my brain, to me, was just thought. I didn't know that there was anything wrong. Uh, Luckily, well, I thought that my life had no value. I thought that the things that I owned had value. I owned a house. I had a life insurance policy. I had some money. And I wanted to make sure that in my passing, my assets moved along to the right people. I knew that the money could help my family, and I didn't want it to go to waste. So it took a couple of days to get everything in order. And during those couple of days, I ran into somebody who understood mental health issues. She understood suicidality, and she thought something is off. Something is off here. And she did the absolute right thing. She walked right up to me, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, Gabe, are you planning on killing yourself? I got excited. I remember I thought this was normal. I thought this was very normal. So I said, yes, enthusiastically, yes. And what I thought to myself is, this is great. I'm going to have help. Remember that stack of paperwork that I was talking about? I was just going to leave it on the kitchen table with a note that said, like, dear mom, here's all my stuff. But now I can give that stack of papers to this woman. This woman can give it to my mother. And that's one more problem solved. This is how my brain was working. Well, the woman kind of freaked out a little bit and she said, oh my God, we have to go to the hospital. I said, the hospital? Why on earth would we go to the hospital? I'm not sick. And she goes, I'm not kidding. Get in the car. We need to go to the emergency room right now. The emergency room, I looked at her like she was nuts. I said, the emergency room? Why would we go to the emergency room? See, the emergency room is where you go when you have a heart attack. The emergency room is where you go when you get in a car accident. The emergency room is where you go when you fall off the roof. The emergency room is not where you go when you make the very reasonable and rational decision to take your own life. This woman was smart. She was really smart. And she said, okay, I'll tell you what. Get in the car, we'll drive to the hospital, we'll ask the doctor if this is where you need to be. And Gabe, I'll tell you what, if you're right, I will buy you dinner anywhere you want in the city. Well, apparently, even in my suicidal, delusional, and depressed state, I still had the overwhelming desire to win an argument. So I agreed to these terms and hopped in the car, and on our way to the emergency room, we drove. Now, I always like to pause right here and tell everybody that I wasn't pretty sure I was right. I wasn't 99.9% sure I was right. I was 100% positive that I was right. I was as sure of my rightness as all of you are sure that you are alive and breathing and watching me right now. There was zero doubt. On the drive there, my entire thought process was, how expensive of a restaurant can I pick? Can I pick a steakhouse? And if I pick the steakhouse, can I pay the extra $3 and get like the mushroom topper, right? Can I get the add-ons? What about an appetizer and dessert? Is that going too far, right? Would that make me a bad person? This is what I was thinking about on my way to the emergency room because I had just told somebody that I wanted to kill myself. Now, we get to the emergency room and we walk in the front door. We go up to the intake specialist and she says, my friend says that he wants to kill himself. And the woman says, I'm going to need to see your insurance card and ID. This did not make me think that anything was up because I thought a young woman shows up with a young man, says he wants to kill himself. For liability reasons, somebody should probably take down some names. So I pulled out my health insurance card, I pulled out my ID, and I handed it to the intake person. And the intake person, did all the things that the intake person does, and then put me in a room. Now, the American healthcare system defines a room as 2 curtains and a gurney. So here's a little real estate tip for all of you who own a house. If you run a curtain down the middle of your 3-bedroom house, all the bedrooms, you now have a 6-bedroom house. Like, that's just, according to the American healthcare system, you do. I don't make the rules, but they put me in a room. So I'm sitting there on the gurney in between the 2 curtains, and I think for a moment, and I think, okay, this has gone too far. All right. This woman is clearly an idiot, but she's a nice person. She's trying to help me. See, I thought they moved us to this room because security was getting ready to come and yell at us. I thought a hospital administrator was going to lecture us about wasting their resources. I honestly believe that the police might be called. And what I honestly thought was, this woman's dumb, but she's kind-hearted and she was just trying to help me, and I don't want anything bad to happen to her. I shouldn't have agreed to this. This has gone too far. I owe it to her to get us out of this. So I decided in that moment that I was just going to fall on my sword, apologize, and get us out of there. And hey, it's not her fault she's stupid. This is what I'm thinking as I'm sitting in an emergency room after an intake specialist has moved me to a room after hearing that I am there for suicidality. Well, eventually somebody does come over and they start asking me questions, one after another, just a little patter. And as they're asking me the questions, I notice that they're holding a clipboard. And on the clipboard is a sheet of paper, and on the sheet of paper are the questions. And I thought to myself, where did they get those questions? How did they know I was coming? Somebody had a printed list of questions for Gabe? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they have these questions? I have to admit that kind of confused me a little bit. How Why would they have questions for me? This doesn't make any sense. That person got done with their questions and then left the room. A little while later, another person came in. I found out that the first person was a social worker, and the second person that came in was the attending, the doctor. And the doctor started asking me the same questions, albeit slightly different words, slightly different order. But I noticed that he too was holding a clipboard, and on the clipboard was a sheet of paper, and on the sheet of paper were the questions. And that's when I realized that they weren't questions for Gabe. They were questions for somebody who comes to the emergency room and says that they're suicidal. They 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 were following a protocol because they knew what to do if somebody showed up at the emergency room and said that they were thinking about hurting themselves or ending their lives. It's what they do there because I'm where I'm supposed to be because something's wrong. That's the last thing that I remember about being in the emergency room. The next thing that I remember is waking up in a hospital bed in one of those gowns where your butt hangs out the back. And a woman kept coming in and opening the door, and a light would kind of shine on me, and then she would shut the door. And this was happening, I would find out later, every 15 minutes. And I finally timed it right. So when the door swung open, I said, "Hey, where am I?" And she said, "You're in the hospital." And I said, "Oh, okay. What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm checking on you." And I said, "Well, you don't have to check on me anymore. I just want to sleep." And she said, "Well, I have to check on you because you're on suicide watch." And I said, "Oh, okay." So now I'm starting to put together the pieces. All right, I'm in a psychiatric ward. I'm on suicide watch, and I've been admitted here. Okay, television can solve this problem for me. All I have to do is find the ping pong table and I will know what's going on. See, up until that point, every pop culture representation of a mental hospital always showed the patients playing ping pong. Think about it, it's in every single movie. They're always playing ping pong in the psych ward. So as soon as I find the ping pong table, that will line everything else up. I'll be able to make a plan and all will be good. So I got up, held my robe shut so my ass wasn't hanging out, and I ventured into the ward looking for the ping pong table. Well, I went from room to room to room to room to room, and there was no ping pong table materializing. And I got a little more agitated. I moved a little faster, and finally somebody came over and said, "Sir, can I help you?" And I thought, aha, customer service. Yes, yes. Where is your ping pong table? And he said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have a ping pong table on the ward." And I said, "Yes, yes, you do. Where is the ping pong table?" And he said, "I'm sorry, we don't have one. It's not safe. You know, there's sharp corners, there's netting, there's paddles. This is not the kind of thing that you give to people who could self-harm." And I said, "No, there has to be a ping pong table." And he said, "I'm sorry, sir, there is not. And I need you to sit down." And I crumpled right there in a chair. And with the sole exception of my grandfather's death, this is the worst moment of my life. And up until then, it was the worst moment of my life because that was the moment I realized that I couldn't rely on my own brain. I wasn't in a psychiatric hospital with other crazy people. I was in a psychiatric hospital because I myself was crazy. I wasn't there with mental patients. I was there because I was a mental patient. Something had gone very wrong. I couldn't rely on my own brain, memories. Nothing was going right. And I just sat there and cried. I just cried. Later on that day, I would be officially diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a classic representation, the doctor said. And in that moment, I thought two things. The first thing I thought is, oh my God, thank God they caught this before I hurt anybody. See, remember, I believed all the same stereotypes that everybody else did. You know, all violence comes from mentally ill people. I believed this. I grew up in this society. Mentally ill people were the source of all the violence. That's what we were taught. That's what I absorbed. That's what I learned. And all I could think of now that I was a mentally ill person was I could have hurt my mother, my sister, my brother, my father. I thank God they caught it before I hurt anybody. And the second thing that I thought was, I need to liquidate all my assets and move into a group home. See, I believe that everybody with mental illness lived in, I don't know, a group home. I thought we were supposed to be like warehoused or something. I believed the pop culture representation of mental illness, which is that we couldn't take care of ourselves, we couldn't excel, we couldn't achieve. We were just going from one crisis to another. I didn't have any hope. I didn't have a clear understanding of mental health concerns or conditions or anything. And you know, the final thing that I thought was Kurt Cobain. For those of you who don't know, Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of the alternative rock band Nirvana. Kurt Cobain was a once in a lifetime musical talent. Kurt Cobain was famous. Kurt Cobain was rich. In fact, Kurt Cobain was so rich that the people around him were rich based on his work. If that's not a reason to keep somebody alive, I don't know what is. And Kurt Cobain, who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, died by suicide. I'm not a once in a lifetime musical talent. I'm not famous. I'm not rich. And I am not so rich that I make other people rich. I'm just some schlub from Ohio. So in my mind, I was just waiting to die. If Kurt Cobain couldn't beat it with all of those resources, what hope did I have? And that's really what I believed for the next several hours. It wouldn't be until later that evening that I was attending a support group. And the way that the support group worked is there was people from the outside that came in. So I was, of course, confined to the mental hospital because I was currently inpatient there. But the support group was open to the community. So there were some people like me who were inpatient. Then there were some people who were coming from the outside, and we all attended the support group together, and it was held in the evenings. And it was just luck that I agreed to go that evening, honestly, because I was bored. But it was also luck that this woman showed up. Now, many of you are, you know, obviously DBSA is a support group, but the hallmark of this support group is everybody goes around and does a check-in in the here and now. And I'm sure you've all seen this before, so I'm kind of speaking to the choir a little bit. But, you know, people say things like, my name is Gabe Howard and I live with bipolar disorder. And this week has been, and then you give an update on your week. You know, and as it was going around, people said, you know, my name is such and such, I live with depression. My name is such and such, I live with anxiety. My name is such and such, I have suicidality. And we got to this one woman who was a little older than me. And she said, you know, hello, my name is, I honestly don't remember her name. I live with bipolar disorder. And this week has been tough. You know, I've kind of been fighting with my husband a little bit. Work has been really stressful. The kids have kind of taken a lot out of me, and the house was a mess. Now, I want to confess to all of you that I didn't give a shit about this woman's life one iota. All I heard was she lived with bipolar disorder and she had a house, a spouse, a job, and children. That was my first glimmer of hope. Here is a woman with my diagnosis who has things that I want. She had a marriage, she had a job, she had a family, she had a partner. Well, if she could do it, and she's from Ohio to boot, she lives in my community. If she could do it, that meant that I could do it. This gave me my first glimmer of, okay, well, now wait a minute. There is an opportunity here. She works hard and she has these things. I can work hard and I can have these things. I didn't know it at the time, but this is what peer support is. But how lucky was I that this woman decided to come to that support group in that moment? If she had stayed home that day, I might not have got a glimmer of hope, and hope is a powerful thing. And this all of a sudden changed my trajectory from I need to go to a group home and thank God I wasn't violent to, oh my God, I can have a job. I can have a house. I can have a wife. I can have a family. I can have a life. She had all the things that I wanted. And if she could do it, well, clearly I could do it. She replaced Kurt Cobain in my mind as an example of somebody with bipolar disorder. Suddenly it went from, uh-oh, I'm going to die and nobody ever gets well, to this woman's doing it. Why? She's not special. I'm not special. We can be not special together. This is fantastic. It energized me. It changed everything. And the next morning when I woke up, I started making decisions and asking questions about how could I get to that? How could I achieve that? I was in the hospital for 4 days, and then I was finally released to a step-down unit. Assisted outpatient treatment is what it was called at the time. It's where you go to you sleep in your own bed and you have your evenings free, but during the day you come to the hospital and you do programs. So it's a step down program so that you don't have to be inpatient, but it's intensive outpatient treatment because you're getting therapy, 6, 8 hours a day. I did that for the next 6 weeks. I was released after that to community care, my own therapist, my own psychiatrist. And I like to say that that began my 4-year epic battle against bipolar disorder. It took 4 years from the time that I was diagnosed to the time that I reached recovery. Now, I define recovery as spending more of my time living my life than I do managing bipolar disorder. See, before I was diagnosed, 100% of my life was in service to bipolar disorder. It just owned me. I did whatever it said. After I got diagnosed, I started taking pieces back, but I spent an awful lot of time. Relapse is part of recovery. I needed to learn coping skills. I needed to find the right combination of medication. I needed to manage all of these things and get to where I needed to be. But as I was chipping away at it, and then one day I realized that I'm spending the majority of my life living life. I'm not spending it managing bipolar disorder. Some little piece. I can't turn my back on bipolar disorder because that's when it strikes. But I'm spending the majority of my time doing whatever I want. I'm living my life. I'm going on vacation. I'm going to concerts. I'm arguing with my wife. I'm doing whatever it is that I want. And that took a lot of time. That took me 4 years. But once I got there, I realized, all right, I'm leading a relatively normal, if not mundane life, and I can do whatever I want. And I always thought about that version of Gabe who was in the hospital and couldn't think of anybody living openly with bipolar disorder. And I decided in that moment that I wanted to be as loud and as out there as possible. See, crisis needs no help. Right? When I'm walking down the street, going to the grocery store, running my errands, mowing my lawn, taking care of my dog, nobody says, there's a guy with bipolar disorder doing the right thing. But the minute I'm symptomatic, the minute I think that the Coke machine is a dragon, well, that's what everybody talks about. Hey, there was this bipolar guy that acted up, that scared the children, that the police had to be called about. Crisis just needs no help. But doing well, that takes some oomph. I have to start yelling, hey, I'm a guy with bipolar disorder and I'm just running errands. It needs some oomph. So I decided that I wanted to be that guy. And I decided that I wanted to be that guy so that the next person who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder would think, there's this loudmouth redhead on the internet and he has bipolar disorder and he's doing okay. And I can do okay as well. I wanted to be that woman who saved me and doesn't even know that she saved me. And I don't even know her name. She could be in the room right now. I have no idea who she is. She was just a person who attended a support group while I was inpatient in a psychiatric hospital all the way back in 2004. But because she was there, she changed the trajectory of my life. And I wanted to change the trajectory of as many people's lives as I could. And I could only do that by being open about having bipolar disorder and just showing people that, hey, I'm not special. And I'm not rich, I'm not famous, I'm not anything. I'm just a guy from Ohio. But because I was able to get care, because I was able to get supports, and because I was able to do these things, I'm living a relatively normal life. And I wanted to be that for as many people as I could. And that began the basis of my speaking career, began the basis of my blogging, which eventually turned into podcasting, which eventually turned into everything that, well, it's turned into. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done because I just feel like the more that I can do to show people that I am boring and bipolar, the more that it sets the tone for other people to live with bipolar disorder and lead relatively normal lives. Because I didn't have that. I didn't have that in the beginning. And I only got it because I got lucky. And I really didn't want this to come down to luck for other people. And that is why I went into the work that I went into. And I didn't think it would take me this far. Honestly, I thought it would always kind of be what the kids are calling a side hustle. But it was able to become my full-time job, and I'm super proud of that. And I just want everybody to know that I'm really humbled to have people all the way in California care what a guy from Ohio who lives with bipolar disorder is doing. It's really humbling to me. So that is the basics of my story. I know that many of you listen to the podcast. Many of you have read my book. You've learned things that I've done. So I want to spend the rest of the time and turn it over to you and answer any questions that you have. Please, nothing is off limits. Ask me anything that you want. But I wanted to give 25 minutes worth of here's the part of the story that maybe that you don't know. And also, I wanted to give you some foundational knowledge so that you felt comfortable asking me questions and knowing that, hey, I'm willing to share. And nothing is off limits. So I don't know who wants to go first or how moderation is going to work. But I want to impress upon all of you that I am here on my own accord. Nobody is making me do this, and nothing is off limits. If you happen to answer or ask me a question that I don't want to answer, I will just politely say pass. But I got to tell you, in 20 years of doing this has happened one time. And it's not because I was unwilling to answer the question. It was because the question was about my ex-wife, and I didn't feel that it was appropriate for me to answer it. So please don't be shy. Nothing is off the table. And if something is, I'll tell you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gabe. I can help facilitate. So if anybody has a question, you can either raise your hand and ask it, or you can put it in the chat. I should have opened it up now. But before we get to that, from one loudmouth redhead with bipolar to another, thank you so much. It's so great.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if anybody hasn't seen it, this is, while they're typing questions or thinking about it, this is what my book looks like. You can go to gabehoward.com and buy it, and I'll sign it for you, or you can get it wherever they sell books. If you buy it wherever they sell books, it will probably get to you faster, but it won't be signed. If you buy it from me, it'll take a couple of extra days to get to you, and I'll sign it and throw in stickers. And the stickers are super cool. And of course, I don't have one handy, but I promise that they're worth the price of admission.